Section 20 of the Book of Ghosts. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Carolyn. The Book of Ghosts by Sabine Baring-Gould. Section 20. Mustapha, Part 1. 1. Among the many hangers-on at the Hôtel de l'Europe at Luxor, donkey boys, porters, guides, antiquity dealers, was one, a young man named Mustapha, who proved a general favorite. I spent 3 winters at Luxor, partly for my health, partly for pleasure, mainly to make artistic studies, as I am by profession a painter. So I came to know Mustapha fairly well in 3 stages during those 3 winters. When I first made his acquaintance, he was in the transition condition from boyhood to manhood. He had an intelligent face, with bright eyes, a skin soft as brown silk, with a velvety hue on it. His features were regular, and if his face was a little too round to quite satisfy an English artistic eye, yet this was a peculiarity to which one soon became accustomed. He was unflaggingly good-natured and obliging. A mongrel, no doubt he was. Arab and native Egyptian blood were mingled in his veins. But the result was happy. He combined the patience and gentleness of the child of Mizraim with the energy and pluck of the son of the desert. Mustapha had been a donkey-boy, but had risen a stage higher, and looked, as the object of his supreme ambition, to become some day a dragon-man, and blaze like one of these gilded beetles in lace and chains, rings and weapons. To become a dragon-man, one of the most obsequious of men till engaged, one of the veriest tyrants when engaged. To what higher could an Egyptian boy aspire? To become a dragon-man means to go in broadcloth and with gold chains when his fellows are half naked, to lounge and twist the moustache when his kinsfolk are toiling under the water-buckets, to be able to extort backsheesh from all the tradesmen to whom he can introduce a master, to do nothing himself and make others work for him, to be able to look to purchase 2, 3, even 4 wives when his father contented himself with 1, to soar out of the region of native virtues into that of foreign vices, to be superior to all instilled prejudices against spirits and wine, that is the ideal set before young Egypt through contact with the English and the American tourist. We all liked Mustapha. No one had a bad word to say of him. Some pious individuals rejoiced to see that he had broken with the Koran, as if this were a first step towards taking up with the Bible. A free-thinking professor was glad to find that Mustapha had emancipated himself from some of those shackles which religion places on august, divine humanity, and that by getting drunk he gave pledge that he had risen into a sphere of pure emancipation which eventuates in ideal perfection. As I made my studies, I engaged Mustapha to carry my easel and canvas, or camp-stool. I was glad to have him as a study, to make him stand by a wall or sit on a pillar that was prostrate, as artistic exigencies required. He was always ready to accompany me. There was an understanding between us that when a drove of tourists came to Luxor, he might leave me for the day to pick up what he could then from the natural prey. But I found him not always keen to be off duty to me. Though he could get more from the occasional visitor than from me, he was above the ravenous appetite for backsheesh which consumed his fellows. He who has much to do with the native Egyptian will have discovered that there are in him a fund of kindliness and a treasure of good qualities. He is delighted to be treated with humanity, pleased to be noticed, and ready to repay attention with touching gratitude. He is by no means as rapacious for backsheesh as the passing traveller supposes. He is shrewd to distinguish between man and man, like this one, and will do anything for him unrewarded, and will do naught for another for any bribe. The Egyptian is now in a transitional state. If it be quite true that the touch of England is restoring life to his crippled limbs, and the voice of England bidding him rise up and walk, there are occasions on which association with Englishmen is a disadvantage to him. Such an instance is that of poor, good Mustapha. It was not my place to caution Mustapha against the pernicious influences to which he was subjected, and, to speak plainly, I did not know what line to adopt, on what ground to take my stand, if I did. He was breaking with the old life, and taking up with what was new, retaining of the old only what was bad in it, and acquiring of the new none of its good parts. Civilization, European civilization, is excellent, but cannot be swallowed at a gulp, nor does it wholly suit the Oriental digestion. That which impelled Mustapha still further in his course was the attitude assumed towards him by his own relatives and the natives of his own village. They were strict Moslems, and they regarded him as one on the highway to becoming a renegade. They treated him with mistrust, showed him aversion, and loaded him with reproaches. Mustapha had a high spirit, and he resented rebuke. Let his fellows grumble and objurgate, said he. They would cringe to him when he became a dragon man, with his pockets stuffed with piastres. There was in our hotel, the second winter, a young fellow of the name of Jameson, a man with plenty of money, superficial good nature, little intellect, very conceited and egoistic, and this fellow was Mustapha's evil genius. It was Jameson's delight to encourage Mustapha in drinking and gambling. Time hung heavy on his hands. He cared nothing for hieroglyphs, scenery bored him, antiquities, art, had no charm for him. Natural history presented to him no attraction, and the only amusement level with his mental faculties was that of hoaxing natives or breaking down their religious prejudices. Matters were in this condition as regarded Mustapha, when an incident occurred during my second winter at Luxor that completely altered the tenor of Mustapha's life. One night a fire broke out in the nearest village. It originated in a mud hovel belonging to a fellah. His wife had spilled some oil on the hearth, and the flames leaping up had caught the low thatch, which immediately burst into a blaze. A wind was blowing from the direction of the Arabian desert, and it carried the flames and ignited the thatch before it on other roofs. The conflagration spread, and the whole village was menaced with destruction. The greatest excitement and alarm prevailed. The inhabitants lost their heads. Men ran about rescuing from their hovels their only treasures, old sardine tins and empty marmalade pots. Women wailed, children sobbed, no one made any attempt to stay the fire, and above all were heard the screams of the woman whose incaution had caused the mischief, and who was being beaten unmercifully by her husband. The few English in the hotel came on the scene, and with their instinctive energy and system set to work to organize a corps and subdue the flames. The women and girls who were rescued from the menaced hovels, or plucked out of those already on fire, were in many cases unveiled, and so it came to pass that Mustapha, who, under English direction, was ablest and most vigorous in his efforts to stop the conflagration, met his fate in the shape of the daughter of Ibrahim the farrier. By the light of the flames he saw her, and at once resolved to make that fair girl his wife. No reasonable obstacle intervened, so thought Mustapha. He had amassed a sufficient sum to entitle him to buy a wife and set up a household of his own. A house consists of 4 mud walls and a low thatch, and housekeeping in an Egyptian house is as elementary and economical as the domestic architecture. The maintenance of a wife and family is not costly after the first outlay, which consists in indemnifying the father for the expense to which he has been put in rearing a daughter. The ceremony of courting is also elementary, and the addresses of the suitor are not paid to the bride, but to her father, and not in person by the candidate, but by an intermediary. Mustapha negotiated with a friend, a fellow hanger-on at the hotel, to open proceedings with the farrier. He was to represent to the worthy man that the suitor entertained the most ardent admiration for the virtues of Ibrahim personally, that he was inspired with but one ambition, which was alliance with so distinguished a family as his. He was to assure the father of the damsel that Mustapha undertook to proclaim through Upper and Lower Egypt, in the ears of Egyptians, Arabs, and Europeans, that Ibrahim was the most remarkable man that ever existed for solidity of judgment, excellence of parts, uprightness of dealing, nobility of sentiment, strictness in observance of the precepts of the Koran. And finally, Mustapha was anxious to indemnify this same paragon of genius and virtue for his condescension in having cared to breed and clothe and feed for several years a certain girl, his daughter, if Mustapha might have that daughter as his wife. Not that he cared for the daughter in herself, but as a means whereby he might have the honor of entering into alliance with one so distinguished and so esteemed of Allah as Ibrahim the farrier. To the infinite surprise of the intermediary, and to the no less surprise and mortification of the suitor, Mustapha was refused. He was a bad Moslem. Ibrahim would have no alliance with one who had turned his back on the Prophet and drunk bottled beer. Till this moment Mustapha had not realized how great was the alienation between his fellows and himself, what a barrier he had set up between himself and the men of his own blood. The refusal of his suit struck the young man to the quick. He had known and played with the farrier's daughter in childhood till she had come of age to veil her face. Now that he had seen her in ripe charms, his heart was deeply stirred and engaged. He entered into himself, and going to the mosque, he there made the solemn vow that if he ever touched wine, ale, or spirits again, he would cut his throat, and he sent word to Ibrahim that he had done so, and begged that he would not dispose of his daughter, and finally reject him, till he had seen how that he, who had turned in thought and manner of life from the Prophet, would return with firm resolution to the right way. 2. From this time Mustapha changed his conduct. He was obliging and attentive as before, ready to exert himself to do for me what I wanted, ready also to extort money from the ordinary tourist for doing nothing, to go with me and carry my tools when I went forth painting, and to joke and laugh with Jameson. But unless he were unavoidably detained, he said his prayers 5 times daily in the mosque, and no inducement whatever could make him touch anything save sherbet, milk, or water. Mustapha had no easy time of it. The strict Mohammedans mistrusted this sudden conversion, and believed that he was playing a part. Ibrahim gave him no encouragement. His relatives maintained their reserve and stiffness toward him. His companions, moreover, who were in their transitional age, and those who had completely shaken off all faith in Allah and trust in the Prophet and respect for the Koran, were incensed at his desertion. He was ridiculed, insulted. He was waylaid and beaten. The young fellows mimicked him, the elders scoffed at him. Jameson took his change to heart, and laid himself out to bring him out of his pot of scruples. "Mustapha ain't any sport at all now," said he. "I'm hanged if he has another para from me." He offered him bribes in gold, he united with the others in ridicule, he turned his back on him, and refused to employ him. Nothing availed. Mustapha was respectful, courteous, obliging as before, but he had returned, he said, to the faith and rule of life in which he had been brought up, and he would never again leave it. "I have sworn," said he, "that if I do I will cut my own throat." I had been, perhaps, negligent in cautioning the young fellow the first winter that I knew him against the harm likely to be done to him by taking up with European habits contrary to his law and the feelings and prejudices of his people. Now, however, I had no hesitation in expressing to him the satisfaction I felt at the courageous and determined manner in which he had broken with acquired habits that could do him no good. For one thing, we were now better acquaintances, and I felt that as one who had known him for some more than a few months in the winter, I had a good right to speak. And again, it is always easier or pleasanter to praise than to reprimand. One day, when sketching, I cut my pencil with a pruning knife I happened to have in my pocket. My proper knife of many blades had been left behind by misadventure. Mustapha noticed the knife and admired it, and asked if it had cost a great sum. "Not at all," I answered. "I did not even buy it. It was given to me. I ordered some flower seeds from a seedsman, and when he sent me the consignment he included this knife in a case as a present. It is not worth more than a shilling in England." He turned it about with looks of admiration. "It is just the sort that would suit me," he said. "I know your other knife with many blades. It is very fine, but it is too small. I do not want it to cut pencils. It has other things in it, a hook for taking stones from a horse's hoof, a pair of tweezers for removing hairs. I do not want such, but a knife such as this, with such a curve, is just the thing." "Then you shall have it," said I. "You are welcome. It was for rough work only that I brought the knife to Egypt with me." I finished a painting that winter that gave me real satisfaction. It was of the great court of the Temple of Luxor by evening light, with the last red glare of the sun over the distant desert hills, and the eastern sky above a purple depth. What colours I used! The intensest on my palette, and yet fell short of the effect. The picture was in the Academy, was well hung, abominably represented in one of the illustrated guides to the galleries as a blotch by some sort of photographic process on gelatine. My picture sold, which concerned me most of all, and not only did it sell at a respectable figure, but it also brought me 2 or 3 orders for Egyptian pictures. So many English and American go up the Nile, and carry away with them pleasant reminiscences of the land of the Pharaohs, that when in England they are fain to buy pictures which shall remind them of scenes in that land. I returned to my hotel at Luxor in November, to spend there a third winter. The fellaheen about there saluted me as a friend with an affectionate delight, which I am quite certain was not assumed, as they got nothing out of me save kindly salutations. I had the Egyptian fever on me, which, when once acquired, is not to be shaken off. An enthusiasm for everything Egyptian, the antiquities, the history of the Pharaohs, the varied desert, the brown Nile, the desolate hill ranges, the ever blue sky, the marvellous colorations at rise and set of sun, and last, but not least, the prosperity of the poor peasants. I am quite certain that the very warmest welcome accorded to me was from Mustapha, and almost the first words he said to me on my meeting him again were, "I have been very good. I say my prayers. I drink no wine, and Ibrahim will give me his daughter in the second Jumada, what you call January." "Not before, Mustapha?" "No, sir. He says I must be tried for 1 whole year, and he is right." "Then soon after Christmas you will be happy." "I have got a house and made it ready. Yes, after Christmas there will be one very happy man, one very, very happy man in Egypt, and that will be your humble servant, Mustapha." Section 20.